All right, so let me first start by turning it over to you in terms of, do you have any questions about the report or about the book or anything in general about the class? We can start with questions and then I'll move more directly towards the report and the report guidelines. So any questions you guys have? All right, so again, feel free to jump in at any time because I'll try my best to cover everything, but if you have a question I don't touch on, please let me know. So, just to make sure we're all on the same page, the report is due the 29th. So it's due on Tuesday. And basically, when you're thinking about the report, first thing is, how to write it properly. And basically, the report will be comprised of, you know, 2, 3, and 4 in the report guidelines. The first part, number 2, gets into the main argument, the thesis of the book, and then part 3 gets into how LaRoe supports her thesis, and then the last part, we get specifically into the variable of race and how that can influence parenting practices. So basically, that's the information gonna make up the paper itself. Other guidelines are page length. So to earn the 10 points, you need to get at least 3 full pages double spaced. And that shouldn't be a problem. Most papers will be around 4 to 5, sometimes even 6 pages long. So as long as you're doing what I'm asking you to do, meeting that 3 page minimum shouldn't be an issue. And it's okay if you go over 5, 6, 7 pages. That's fine, just as long as you meet the 3 page minimum, and then you'll be good to go. And then kind of within the paper, in terms of how you're writing it, you'll be using the text, you'll be using the information in the book. So, you'll cite whenever you kind of use an example or use an idea from the book, you will cite where that comes from. And I kind of give you an example of how to do it with LaRoe. Here you'd have the author's last name, 2011, which is the year of publication, and then you would put the page number or page numbers. So basically, you cite to allow the reader, to allow me to go into the book and find what you're talking about. So if I want to read more about it, or if I'm interested in kind of finding where this was, you give me that information where I can actually find the ideas, the text that you're using. So it could be a direct quotation, you take something word for word, or it could be a paraphrase where you're not saying something word for word, but using a general idea from the book. Either way, you should cite it and kind of show the reader where this information comes from. And more or less, you should be citing 1 or 2 times per paragraph because you're talking about the book. You should be kind of telling the reader where this information can be found. So any questions about kind of the formatting of the paper? All right, so let me get into the first part. So the first part, again, number 2, it gets into the thesis. And the thesis basically is just the main argument being put out there. And throughout the rest of the book, you're supporting that main argument. And so for LaRoe, she has a thesis. She says, either race or class matters more when it comes to influencing parenting styles. So here I ask you to select the one that she uses. She says it's either race or class that matters more. So I'm asking you to identify the variable that matters more, and then explain, why, class matters more than race when it comes to parenting, or you explain why race matters more than class when it comes to parenting. So that's what I'm asking you to do there. And there's many ways you could explain your answer, but again, kind of refer to the book. If race matters more than class, then you'd see families with the same race but for differing class backgrounds, they'd be parenting in the same way. if class matters more than race, then you see people that maybe share a racial category, but they parent differently because they come from different class backgrounds. Likewise, you see two different racial families, and although they're different races, they parent in the same way because they share a class background. So that's basically, again, ties back to the thesis. And I'm asking you to basically put out there that you understand what the thesis is and you understand kind of her logic behind it. So any questions about that first part of the paper?
I do have a quick question.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Maddie, by the way.
Hi.
So even though we're exploring like which one Luro touches on more, can we talk about both?
Yeah, I mean, you know, basically you will be talking about both in the paper. Part 3 of the paper focuses on the class variable, and part 4 of the paper asks you to focus on the variable race. So, you know, we're not trying to ignore one or the other, but, you know, she does make an argument that one does matter more. And so that's what I'm asking you to do for that part. But always, you know, feel free to, you know, provide context, you know. So it's not only about answering things, but, you know, you need to provide that context to the reader. So, you know, just, you know, always assume that, you know, the reader hasn't read the book, you know, so don't assume that, oh, he knows what I'm talking about, or, you know, always explain your thoughts fully. And that includes providing kind of the proper context. And, you know, that would tie into you, you know, talking about both variables in part 2, but just recognizing that, yes, they both influence parenting, but one matters more than the other. And this is why it matters more. Does
Thank
that
you.
make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So any other thoughts or questions? So let me, you know, jump ahead to 3. So kind of the second part of the paper itself. Here I'm asking you to focus on that dimension of class. So basically, if you look at how she outlines the book, you know, the first 2 chapters are providing a little bit of background, a little bit of preview into the rest of the book. But then if you look at kind of the middle of the book itself, this is how she supports her thesis. So she, you know, the beginning of the book, this is the thesis. And then if you go to the next few parts of the book, the daily life organization, the language use, and the families and institutions, those are the 3 main connections that she's making between social class and different parenting styles. So basically, that's what I'm asking you to do in this part of the paper. Examine those 3 main connections between class and parenting styles. You know, how class matters when it comes to the daily life organization. You know, why class matters when it comes to language use and the families and how they interact with their kids' institutions. So, you know, I might as well let the cat out of the bag. I'm kind of, you know, tipping my hand here where the main variable, the one that matters more than the other, is class. So, you know, hopefully you've done your reading. Hopefully you've been following the lectures. You figured that out by now. So she says, although they're both influential, class outweighs race when it comes to having more influence on parenting. And so this third part here, I'm asking you basically to support that thesis. You know, shows how class does matter when it comes to different parenting styles emerging. You know, you got one style when it comes to the daily life of the kid in the CC parenting, the concerted cultivation. You get a different kind of parenting style when it comes to a daily life organization for the kid and the NG, natural growth parenting style. So basically, you'll be talking about those different ways of parenting when it comes to those 3 connections that she makes, the language use and the families and institutions as well. But then the next part of that, for each of those connections, explain why class matters. So here sometimes, you know, students kind of stop short. In other words, they do a good job of kind of showing the different CC styles compared to the NG styles, but then they don't explain exactly why class matters. So the different parenting doesn't come out of thin air or just happen by chance. Rather, class matters in terms of class-based resources. So it could be a money issue that causes one parenting style or the other. You have money or you lack money, so it kind of shapes why you parent in one way or another. It could be time as a resource. So, money is a class-based resource, but so is time. You don't have the time to do all this, or you do have the time to do it. Um, Education is another class-based resource. So anyways, you want to identify specifically, what is it about class and those class-based resources that shape the CC style or that shape the NG style parenting. And that's what I'm asking you to do for that kind of second part of the paper, the third number in the guidelines. So let me just, I got a chat question. Well, when it comes to kind of, there's a lot of information in the book. So the question basically gets at, where should I, start? Where should I stop? And, you always just want to concentrate on, basically what I'm asking you to do. You can provide, context and all that, but, as long as you're doing what I'm asking you to do in the paper, that's how you learn, that's how you earn your points, or that's how you lose your points if you're not doing it. So just kind of stay focused on, what I'm asking you to do in the paper. And that will kind of allow you to do what you have to do and not be spending a lot of time doing things that I'm not asking you to do, doing things that will not earn you any points. And in terms of, there's a lot of information, so don't think you have to talk about everything. So, again, I say provide an example of the connections. So basically, we'll talk about the CC and NG parenting styles when it comes to 1, 2, and 3. The daily life, the language use, and the families interacting with their kids' institutions. So, don't try to explain, everything, because there's, a lot going on in the book. And so you're not really reporting on the entire book, but just kind of reporting on what I'm asking you to do in the paper. So kind of think about it like that rather than a general report about the book, or you'd be trying to summarize everything. Here, I'm not asking you to, summarize everything, but basically, discuss the thesis, show how the thesis is supported. Then we come back to kind of that other variable, specifically the variable of race, and albeit not as influential, but still it can have an influence on how a parent parents. And we'll get into that in the fourth part of the paper. So I think, yeah, so if that addresses your question, great. If not, feel free to chat at me again and I'll give another shot. So yeah, so let me stop there before we get into the fourth part, last part of the paper. Any questions about that middle part? Because that middle part is kind of the heart of your paper. It should be the longest, just because you're doing a little bit more compared to the other sections. And also it's, worth the most points. So, basically I allocate, 10 points for each of the 3 connections. And kind of within those 10 points, I'd divide points up for, the example that you show, NG, CC, but also points for kind of why class matters. What are those class-based resources that create one parenting style or the other? So anything I can do for number 3 before we move on? So getting to number 4, again, we're looking at the variable of race here. So again, recognizing the thesis that she says class matters more than race, we still can recognize how race can be influential. And here I ask you to, basically show one example of how race can influence the parenting, or how race can, influence why a parent does something, or maybe why a parent doesn't do something. Just, connect the dots between the two. and then kind of explain the response. So here's the example, and here's what's going on to explain why race is being influential here. And so, overall, kind of going back to the last, it would have been, today's lecture. So if you haven't watched today's lecture yet, make sure you do that because I talk about this specifically in the lecture for today. But overall, basically, often what you find for racial majority couples who have kids, or for a racial majority parent, when he or she is doing the parenting, they don't think about their kid in terms of their racial status. So for me personally, kind of growing up in a small ruralish town that was dominated by whites, my mom didn't think of me as a white kid. I was this Ryan. And so, when I got in trouble at school, or, whatever would happen, wherever it happened, she never thought about, me being a white kid. Was that a variable in play? In other words, did I get in trouble because, I was a white kid, or did I get in trouble just because I was Ryan? So that's, again, never in my mom's mind. But for an African American kid who's a kind of racial minority in a situation, that can come to the mind of the parent. So the parent, again, you never really know, but it's still there. It still kind of influences your parenting and how you approach it. So did Ryan get in trouble at school because he did something he needed to get punished for? Or did Ryan get in trouble at school because the teacher treats the black kids differently than how the teacher treats the white kids? And so that's what we're kind of looking at, kind of examples in the book where the parent has to think in terms of their kid not only being a kid, but the kid being kind of from a racial minority background. And so if you can go to the different chapters, and no matter the class background of the family, they kind of share this kind of racial influence on their parenting styles. So basically, that's what I'm asking you to do, kind of find an example in the book where race is influencing how a parent's thinking, how a parent is acting, then kind of explain why race is a factor there. And it could be true. A lot of it has to do with the situational makeup, in the sense that, if I grew up if I, went to school where the whites were the minority students, then perhaps, race would be on my mom's mind. Are the kids at school picking on Ryan? Are the teachers at school treating him differently because he's one of the only white kids? So it's not necessarily based upon skin color alone, but more based upon you being the majority or minority in the situation, and being the majority or the minority influences kind of how you approach it. Do I see race or don't I see it? Do I see myself as a man or a woman? Well, perhaps you will if you're the only man or woman in the situation. But if it's more even distribution of the sexes, then typically you don't see yourself as strongly in terms of your sex. So yeah, I'll stop there for the fourth part. So any questions about number 4? All right, so yeah, I'm here for you. Is there anything I can touch on further? Or do you have any specific questions I can help you out with? And I always say I'm happy to look at drafts of papers. So, it could be a full draft that you want me to just look over before you officially turn it in. I'd be more than happy to do that. If you just do the first part of the paper, you complete number 2, you want me to read it over just to make sure you're on the right track, I'll be more than happy to do that too. So, if you have time, I'd encourage you to take advantage of me, looking things over, so I can, give you the reassurance that you're doing well, or I could, correct your path if it needs to be corrected at all. So, I guess at this point, what I'll do is say, feel free to go if you got other things to do. Again, make sure to go through that lecture for today's class. If you want to hang out and chat, talk at all, I'll hang out until everybody else leaves. So thanks for coming, and yeah, just keep in touch. Well, Alan, do you have any other questions or anything I can help you out with?
Yeah, I was just like reading through the questions again because I was like basically my question was just like I was just wondering like because sometimes like in the past like I know this is not like an essay but like when people write essays and stuff like they want you like to for example like they're asking you for a question they want you to write like where you got it from or a lead on how you got to the answer for example like like for number two like if you want to I'm not